The Legend of the Deluge in Babylonia. In the introduction to his paper on the Chaldean account of the Deluge, which Smith read in December 1872 and published in 1873, he stated that the Assyrian text, which he had found on Ashurbanipal's tablets, was copied from an archetype at Erech in Lower Babylonia. This archetype was, he thought, either written in or translated into Semitic Babylonian, at a very early period, and although he could not assign a date to it, he adduced a number of convincing proofs in support of his opinion. The language in which he assumed the legend to have been originally composed was known to him under the name of Akkadian or Akkadian, but is now called Sumerian. Recent research has shown that his view on this point was correct on the whole. But there is satisfactory proof available to show that versions or recensions of the legend of the Deluge and of the Epic of Gilgamesh existed both in Sumerian and Babylonian, as early as B.C. 2000. The discovery has been made of a fragment of a tablet with a small portion of the Babylonian version of the legend of the Deluge inscribed upon it, and dated in a year which is the equivalent of the 11th year of Ammisaduga, i.e., about B.C. 1800. 9. And in the museum at Philadelphia 10 is preserved half of a tablet which when whole contained a complete copy of a Sumerian version of the legend, and must have been written about the same date. The fragment of the tablet written in the reign of Ammisaduga is of special importance because the colophon shows that the tablet to which it belonged was the second of a series, and that this series was not that of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and from this we learn that in B.C. 2000 the legend of the Deluge did not form the Exif tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, as it did in the reign of Ashurbanipal, or earlier. The Sumerian version is equally important, though from another point of view, for the contents and position of the portion of it that remains on the half of the tablet mentioned above make it certain that already at this early period there were several versions of the legend of the Deluge current in the Sumerian language. The fact is that the legend of the Deluge was then already so old in Mesopotamia that the scribes added to or abbreviated the text at will, and treated the incidents recorded in it according to local or popular taste, tradition, and prejudice. There seems to be no evidence that proves conclusively that the Sumerian version is older than the Semitic, or that the latter was translated direct from the former version. It is probable that both the Sumerians and the Semites, each in their own way, attempted to commemorate an appalling disaster of unparalleled magnitude, the knowledge of which, through tradition, was common to both peoples. It is, at all events, well known that the Sumerians regarded the Deluge as an historic event, which they were, practically, able to date, for some of their records contain lists of kings who reigned before the Deluge, though it must be confessed that the lengths assigned to their reigns are incredible. After their rule it is expressly noted that the flood occurred, and that, when it passed away, kingship came down again from on high. It is not too much to assume that the original event commemorated in the legend of the Deluge was a serious and prolonged inundation or flood in Lower Babylonia, which was accompanied by great loss of life and destruction of property. The Babylonian versions state that this inundation or flood was caused by rain, but passages in some of them suggest that the effects of the rainstorm were intensified by other physical happenings connected with the earth, of a most destructive character. The Hebrews also, as we may see from the Bible, had alternative views as to the cause of the deluge. According to one, rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, General 7:12. And according to the other the deluge came because all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the floodgates of heaven were opened, General 7:2. The latter view suggests that the rain flood was joined by the waters of the sea. Later tradition, derived partly from Babylonian and partly from Hebrew sources, asserts, e.g., in the Cave of Treasures, a Syriac treatise composed probably at Edessa about the 5th or 6th century A.D., that when Noah had entered the ark and the door was shut, the floodgates of the heavens were opened and the foundations of the earth were rent asunder, and that, the ocean, that great sea which surroundeth the whole world, poured forth its floods. And whilst the floodgates of heaven were open, and the foundations of the earth were rent asunder, the storehouses of the winds burst their bolts, and storms and whirlwinds swept forth, and ocean roared and hurled its floods upon the earth. The ark was steered over the waters by an angel who acted as pilot, and when that had come to rest on the mountains of Cardo, Ararat, God commanded the waters and they became separated from each other. The celestial waters were taken up and ascended to their own place above the heavens whence they came. The waters which had risen up from the earth returned to the lowermost abyss, and those which belonged to the ocean returned to the innermost part thereof. 11. Many authorities seeking to find a foundation of fact for the legend of the deluge in Mesopotamia have assumed that the rain flood was accompanied either by an earthquake or a tidal wave, or by both. There is no doubt that the cities of Lower Babylonia were nearer the sea in the Sumerian period than they are at present, and it is a generally accepted view that the head of the Persian Gulf lay farther to the north at that time. A cyclone coupled with a tidal wave is a sufficient base for any of the forms of the legend now known. A comparison of the contents of the various Sumerian and Babylonian versions of the deluge that have come down to us shows us that they are incomplete. And as none of them tell so connected and full a narrative of the prehistoric shipbuilder as Berosus, a priest of Bel, the great god of Babylon, it seems that the Mesopotamian scribes were content to copy the legend in an abbreviated form. Berosus, it is true, is not a very ancient authority, for he was not born until the reign of Alexander the Great, but he was a learned man and was well acquainted with the Babylonian language, and with the ancient literature of his country, and he wrote a history of Babylonia, some fragments of which have been preserved to us in the works of Alexander Polyhistor, Eusebius, and others. The following is a version of the fragment which describes the flood that took place in the days of Xisuthros, the 10th king of the Chaldeans, and is of importance for comparison with the rendering of the legend of the deluge, as found on the Ninevite tablets, which follows immediately after. The legend of the deluge according to Berosus, after the death of Ardates, his son Xisuthros reigned 18 Sari. In his time happened a great deluge, the history of which is thus described. The deity, Cronus, appeared to him in a vision, and warned him that upon the 15th day of the month Decius there would be a flood, by which mankind would be destroyed. He therefore enjoined him to write a history of the beginning, procedure, and conclusion of all things, and to bury it in the city of the sun at Sippara, and to build a vessel, and take with him into it his friends and relations, and to convey on board everything necessary to sustain life, together with all the different animals, both birds and quadrupeds, and trust himself fearlessly to the deep. Having asked the deity whither he was to sail, he was answered, to the gods, upon which he offered up a prayer for the good of mankind. He then obeyed the divine admonition, and built a vessel 5 stadia in length, and 2 in breadth. Into this he put everything which he had prepared, and last of all conveyed into it his wife, his children, and his friends. After the flood had been upon the earth, and was in time abated, Xisuthros sent out birds from the vessel, which, not finding any food nor any place whereupon they might rest their feet, returned to him again. After an interval of some days, he sent them forth a second time, and they now returned with their feet tinged with mud. He made a trial a third time with these birds, but they returned to him no more, from whence he judged that the surface of the earth had appeared above the waters. He therefore made an opening in the vessel, and upon looking out found that it was stranded upon the side of some mountain, upon which he immediately quitted it with his wife, his daughter, and the pilot. Xisuthros then paid his adoration to the earth, and, having constructed an altar, offered sacrifices to the gods, and, with those who had come out of the vessel with him, disappeared. They, who remained within, finding that their companions did not return, quitted the vessel with many lamentations, and called continually on the name of Xisuthros. Him they saw no more, but they could distinguish his voice in the air, and could hear him admonish them to pay due regard to religion, and likewise informed them that it was upon account of his piety that he was translated to live with the gods, that his wife and daughter, and the pilot, had obtained the same honor. To this he added that they should return to Babylonia, and, it was ordained, search for the writings at Sippara, which they were to make known to mankind, moreover that the place, wherein they then were, was the land of Armenia. The rest having beard these words, offered sacrifices to the gods, and taking a circuit journeyed towards Babylonia. Corey, Ancient Fragments, London, 1832, page 26 ff. The Babylonian legend of the deluge as told to the hero Gilgamesh by his ancestor Utanapishtim, who had been made immortal by the gods. The form of the legend of the deluge given below is that which is found on the 11th of the series of 12 tablets in the royal library at Nineveh, which describe the life and exploits of Gilgamesh, an early king of the city of Erech. As we have seen above, the legend of the deluge has probably no original connection with the Epic of Gilgamesh, but was introduced into it by the editors of the epic at a comparatively late period, perhaps even during the reign of Ashurbanipal, b.c. 669 to 626. A summary of the contents of the other tablets of the Gilgamesh series is given in the following section of this short monograph. It is therefore only necessary to state here that Gilgamesh, who was horrified and almost beside himself when his bosom friend and companion Enkidu died, meditated deeply how he could escape death himself. He knew that his ancestor Utanapishtim had become immortal, therefore he determined to set out for the place where Utanapishtim lived so that he might obtain from him the secret of immortality. Guided by a dream, Gilgamesh set out for the mountain of the sunset, and, after great toil and many difficulties, came to the shore of a vast sea. Here he met Yorshanabi, the boatman of Utanapishtim, who was persuaded to carry him in his boat over the waters of death, and at length he landed on the shore of the country of Utanapishtim. The immortal came down to the shore and asked the newcomer the object of his visit, and Gilgamesh told him of the death of his great friend Enkidu, and of his desire to escape from death and to find immortality. Utanapishtim having made to Gilgamesh some remarks which seemed to indicate that in his opinion death was inevitable. 1. Gilgamesh 13 said unto him, to Utanapishtim the remote, 2. I am looking at thee, Utanapishtim. 3. Thy person is not altered, even as am I so art thou. 4. Verily, nothing about thee is changed, even as am I so art thou. 5. A heart to do battle doth make thee complete. 6. Yet at rest, thou dost lie upon thy back. 7. How then hast thou stood the company of the gods and sought life? Thereupon Utanapishtim related to Gilgamesh the story of the deluge, and the 11th tablet continues thus. 8. Utanapishtim said unto him, to Gilgamesh, 9. I will reveal unto thee, O Gilgamesh, a hidden mystery. 10. And a secret matter of the gods I will declare unto thee. 11. Shuruppak 14. A city which thou thyself knowest. 12. On the bank of the river Purati, Euphrates, is situated. 13. That city is old, and the gods, dwelling within it. 14. Their hearts induced the great gods to make a windstorm. Abu by 15:15. There was their father Anu. 16. Their counselor, the warrior Enlil. 17. Their messenger Yenerta. And 18. Their prince Enujai. 19. Ninijiku, Ea, was with them, in council, and 20. Reported their word to a house of reeds. First speech of Ea to Utanapishtim who is sleeping in a reed hut. 21. O house of reeds, O house of reeds. O wall. O wall. 22. O house of reeds, hear. O wall, understand. 23. O man of Shuruppak, son of Ubatutu. 24. Throw down the house, build a ship. 25. Forsake wealth, seek after life. 26. Hate possessions, save thy life. 27. Bring all seed of life into the ship. 28. The ship which thou shalt build. 29. The dimensions thereof shall be measured. 30. The breadth and the length thereof shall be the same. 31. Then launch it upon the ocean. Utanapishtim's answer to Ea. 32. I understood and I said unto Ea, my lord. 33. See, my lord, that which thou hast ordered. 34. I regard with reverence, and will perform it. 35. But what shall I say to the town, to the multitude, and to the elders? Second speech of Ea. 36. Ea opened his mouth and spake. 37. And said unto his servant, myself. 38. Thus, man, shalt thou say unto them. 39. Ill will of the god Enlil formed against me. 40. Therefore I can no longer dwell in your city. 41. And never more will I turn my countenance upon the soil of Enlil. 42. I will descend into the ocean to dwell with my lord Ea. 43. But upon you he will rain riches. 44. A catch of birds, a catch of fish. 45. An abundant harvest. 46. The sender of 47 shall make hail to fall upon you. The building of the ship. 48. As soon as something of dawn broke. Lines 49 to 54 broken away. 55. The child brought bitumen. 56. The strong man brought what was needed. 57. On the 5th day I laid down its shape. 58. According to the plan its walls were 10 ga, i.e. 120 cubits, high. 59. And the width of its deck was equally 10 ga. 60. I laid down the shape of its forepart and marked it out. 61. I covered it 6 times. 62. I divided into 7. 63. Its interior I divided into 9. 64. Caulking I drove into the middle of it. 65. I provided a steering pole, and cast in all that was needful. 66. 6 SAR of bitumen I poured over the hull. 67. 3 SAR of pitch I poured into the inside. 68. The men who bear loads brought 3 SAR of oil. 69. Besides a SAR of oil which the tackling consumed. 70. And 2 SAR of oil which the boatman hid. 71. I slaughtered oxen for the work people. 72. I slew sheep every day. 73. Beer, sesame wine, oil and wine. 74. I made the people drink as if they were water from the river. 75. I celebrated a feast as if it had been New Year's Day. 76. I opened a box of ointment, I laid my hands in unguent. 77. Before the sunset, the ship was finished. 78. Since was difficult. 79. The shipbuilders brought the of the ship, above and below. 80. 2/3 of it. The loading of the ship. 81. With everything that I possessed I loaded it, i.e., the ship. 82. With everything that I possessed of silver I loaded it. 83. With everything that I possessed of gold I loaded it. 84. With all that I possessed of all the seed of life I loaded it. 85. I made to go up into the ship all my family and kinsfolk. 86. The cattle of the field, the beasts of the field, all handicraftsmen I made them go up into it. 87. The god Shamash had appointed me a time, saying. 88. The sender of will at eventide make a hail to fall. 89. Then enter into the ship and shut thy door. 90. The appointed time drew nigh. 91. The sender of made a hail to fall at eventide. 92. I watched the aspect of the approaching storm. 93. Terror possessed me to look upon it. 94. I went into the ship and shut my door. 95. To the pilot of the ship, Pusenlil the sailor. 96. I committed the great house, i.e., ship, together with the contents thereof. The Abubu, cyclone, and its effects described. 97. As soon as something of dawn shone in the sky. 98. A black cloud from the foundation of heaven came up. 99. Inside it the god Adad thundered. 100. The gods Nabu and Sharu, i.e., Marduk, went before. 101. Marching as messengers over high land and plain. 102. Irigal, Nergal, tore out the post of the ship. 103. Eanerta went on, he made the storm to descend. 104. The Anunnaki 16 brandished their torches. 105. With their glare they lighted up the land. 106. The whirlwind, or cyclone, of Adad swept up to heaven. 107. Every gleam of light was turned into darkness. 108. The land, as if had laid it waste. 109. A whole day long, the flood descended. 110. Swiftly it mounted up. The water reached to the mountains. 111. The water attacked the people like a battle. 112. Brother saw not brother. 113. Men could not be known, or recognized, in heaven. 114. The gods were terrified at the cyclone. 115. They shrank back and went up into the heaven of Anu. 116. The gods crouched like a dog and cowered by the wall. 117. The goddess Ishtar cried out like a woman in travail. 118. The lady of the gods lamented with a sweet voice, saying, Ishtar's lament. 119. May that former day be turned into mud. 120. Because I commanded evil among the company of the gods. 121. How could I command evil among the company of the gods? 122. Command battle for the destruction of my people. 123. Did I of myself bring forth my people? 124. That they might fill the sea like little fishes? Uta Napishtim's story continued. 125. The gods, the Anunnaki wailed with her. 126. The gods bowed themselves, and sat down weeping. 127, their lips were shut tight, in distress. 128, for 6 days and nights. 129. The wind, the storm raged, and the cyclone overwhelmed the land. The abating of the storm. 130, when the 7th day came the cyclone ceased, the storm and battle. 131. Which had fought like an army. 132, the sea became quiet, the grievous wind went down, the cyclone ceased. 133, I looked on the day, and voices were stilled. 134. And all mankind were turned into mud. 135. The land had been laid flat like a terrace. 136, I opened the air hole and the light fell upon my cheek. 137. I bowed myself, I sat down, I cried. 138. My tears poured down over my cheeks. 139, I looked over the quarters of the world, to the limits of ocean. 140, at 12 points islands appeared. 141, the ship grounded on the mountain of Nisir. 142, the mountain of Nisir held the ship, it let it not move. 143, the first day, the second day, the mountain of Nisir held the ship and let it not move. 144, the third day, the fourth day, the mountain of Nisir held the ship and let it not move. 145, the fifth day, the sixth day, the mountain of Nisir held the ship and let it not move. 146, when the 7th day had come. 147. I brought out a dove and let her go free. 148, the dove flew away and, then, came back. 149. Because she had no place to alight on she came back. 150, I brought out a swallow and let her go free. 151, the swallow flew away and, then, came back. 152. Because she had no place to alight on she came back. 153, one brought out a raven and let her go free. 154, the raven flew away, she saw the sinking waters. 155, she ate, she waded, she rose, she came not back. Utnapishtim leads the ship. 156, then I brought out everything to the 4 winds and made a sacrifice. 157. I set out an offering on the peak of the mountain. 158, 7 by 7 I set out the vessels. 159. Under them I piled reeds, cedar wood and myrtle. 160, the gods smelt the savor. 161. The gods smelt the sweet savor. 162, the gods gathered together like flies over him that sacrificed. Speech of Ishtar, lady of the gods. 163 Now when the lady of the gods came nigh. 164. She lifted up the priceless jewels which Anu had made according to her desire, saying, 165. O ye gods here present, as I shall never forget the sapphire jewels of my neck. 166. So shall I ever think about these days, and shall forget them nevermore. 167. Let the gods come to the offering. 168. But let not Enlil come to the offering. 16q. Because he took not thought and made the cyclone. 170. And delivered my people over to destruction. The anger of Enlil. 171, now when Enlil came nigh. 172. He saw the ship, then was Enlil wroth. 173. And he was filled with anger against the gods, the Igigi, saying, 17174. Hath any being escaped with his life? 175. He shall not remain alive, a man among the destruction. Speech Ofenurta. 176. Then Enurta opened his mouth and spake. 177. And said unto the warrior Enlil. 178. Who besides the god Ea can make a plan? 179. The god Ea knoweth everything that is done. 18. The god Ea opened his mouth and spake. 181. And said unto the warrior Enlil. 182. O prince among the gods, thou warrior. 183. How couldst thou, not taking thought, make a cyclone? 184. He who is sinful, on him lay his sin. 185. He who transgresseth, on him lay his transgression. 186. But be merciful that, everything, be not destroyed. Be longsuffering that, man be not blotted out. 187. Instead of thy making a cyclone. 188. Would that the lion had come and diminished mankind. 189, instead of thy making a cyclone. 190. Would that the wolf had come and diminished mankind. 191, instead of thy making a cyclone. 192. Would that a famine had arisen and laid waste the land. 193, instead of thy making a cyclone. 194. Would that Ira, the plague god, had risen up and laid waste the land. 195, as for me I have not revealed the secret of the great gods. 196, I made Atrahasis to see a vision, and thus he heard the secret of the gods. 197, now therefore take counsel concerning him. Enlil deifies Utanapishtim and his wife. 198. Then the god Enlil went up into the ship. 199. He seized me by the hand and brought me forth. 200. He brought forth my wife and made her to kneel by my side. 201. He touched our brows, he stood between us, he blessed us, saving. 202. Formerly Utanapishtim was a man merely. 203. But now let Utanapishtim and his wife be like unto us gods. 204. Utanapishtim shall dwell afar off, at the mouth of the rivers. Utanapishtim ends his story of the deluge. 205. And they took me away to a place afar off, and made me to dwell at the mouth of the rivers. The contents of the remainder of the text on the 11th tablet of the Gilgamesh series are described on page 54. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The name of Gilgamesh was formerly read Izduba, Gizduba, or Gishduba. He is probably referred to as Greek Gilgamos in Elian, De Natura Animalium, 12, 23, ed. Didit, Paris, 1858, page 210. The narrative of the life, exploits and travels of Gilgamesh, king of Erech, filled 12 tablets which formed the series called from the first 3 words of the first tablet, Sha Nagbu Imuru, i.e., he who hath seen all things. The exact period of the reign of this king is unknown, but in the list of the Sumerian kingdoms he is 5th ruler in the dynasty of Erech, which was considered the second dynasty to reign after the deluge. He was said to have ruled for 126 years. The principal authorities for the epic are the numerous fragments of the tablets that were found in the ruins of the Library of Nebo and the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, and are now in the British Museum. 18, but very valuable portions of other and older versions, including some fragments of a Hittite translation, have now been recovered from various sources, and these contribute greatly to the reconstruction of the story. The contents of the 12 tablets may be briefly described thus. The first tablet. The opening lines describe the great knowledge and wisdom of Gilgamesh, who saw everything, learned everything, understood everything, who probed to the bottom the hidden mysteries of wisdom, and who knew the history of everything that happened before the deluge. He traveled far over sea and land, and performed mighty deeds, and then he cut upon a tablet of stone an account of all that he had done and suffered. He built the wall of Erech, founded the holy temple of Eanna, and carried out other great architectural works. He was a semi-divine being, for his body was formed of the flesh of the gods, and 2/3 of him were God, and 1/3 was man. The description of his person is lost. As shepherd, i.e., king, of Erech, he forced the people to toil overmuch, and his demands reduced them to such a state of misery that they cried out to the gods and begged them to create some king who should control Gilgamesh and give them deliverance from him. The gods hearkened to the prayer of the men of Erech, and they commanded the goddess Aruru to create a rival to Gilgamesh. The goddess agreed to do their bidding, and having planned in her mind what manner of being she intended to make, she washed her hands, took a piece of clay, cast it on the ground, and made a male creature like the god Eanurta. His body was covered all over with hair. The hair of his head was long like that of a woman, and he wore clothing like that of Sumakan, the god of cattle. He was different in every way from the people of the country, and his name was Enkidu. He lived in the forests on the hills, ate herbs like the gazelle, drank with the wild cattle, and herded with the beasts of the field. He was mighty in stature, invincible in strength, and obtained complete mastery over all the creatures of the forests in which he lived. One day a certain hunter went out to snare game, and he dug pit traps and laid nets, and made his usual preparations for roping in his prey. But after doing this for 3 days he found that his pits were filled up and his nets smashed, and he saw Enkidu releasing the beasts that had been snared. The hunter was terrified at the sight of Enkidu, and went home hastily and told his father what he had seen and how badly he had fared. By his father's advice he went to Erech, and reported to Gilgamesh what had happened. When Gilgamesh heard his story, he advised him to act upon a suggestion which the hunter's father had already made, namely that he should hire a harlot and take her out to the forest, so that Enkidu might be ensnared by the sight of her beauty and take up his abode with her. The hunter accepted this advice, and having found a harlot to help him in removing Enkidu from the forests, he set out from Erech with her and in due course arrived at the forest where Enkidu lived, and sat down by the place where the beasts came to drink. On the second day, when the beasts came to drink and Enkidu was with them, the woman carried out the instructions which the hunter had given her, and when Enkidu saw her cast aside her veil, he left his beasts and came to her, and remained with her for 6 days and 7 nights. At the end of this period he returned to the beasts with which he had lived on friendly terms, but as soon as the gazelle winded him they took to flight, and the wild cattle disappeared into the woods. When Enkidu saw the beasts forsake him his knees gave way, and he could not run as of old, but when he came to himself he returned to the harlot. She spoke to him flattering words, and asked him why he wandered with the wild beasts in the desert, and then told him she wished to take him back with her to Erech, where Anu and Ishtar lived, and where the mighty Gilgamesh reigned. Enkidu hearkened, and the harlot then told him of the glories of Erech and of Gilgamesh, who, she said, had been forewarned of Enkidu's coming by 2 dreams, which he had related to his divine mother, Ninsun. These she had interpreted as foreshowing the approach of a strong and faithful friend. The second tablet. Having related these dreams of Gilgamesh, the harlot again urged Enkidu to go with her to Erech, and they set out together. On the way she brought him to a shepherd's village, where she instructed him how to eat the bread and beer which was set before him, for until then he had only sucked the milk of cattle. By virtue of eating and drinking this human fare Enkidu became a man instead of a beast, and, taking weapons, he hunted the lions and wolves which preyed upon the shepherd's flocks. A messenger from Gilgamesh now appeared with a summons to the city. He announced that the king offered entertainment, but that he would expect the customary present from a stranger, and would exercise his privilege over the woman who accompanied him. The entrance of Enkidu into the city caused a general excitement, all being amazed at his surpassing strength and his conversion from savagery. The first meeting of Gilgamesh and Enkidu took place when the king came in the night to claim his right to the strange woman. Enkidu violently resisted him, and the 2 heroes in the doorway grappled and snorted like bulls. They shattered the threshold, the wall quivered, in their strife. Gilgamesh was finally worsted, but the result of this combat was that the 2 became fast friends and allies. The third tablet. Owing to mutilation of the text this section begins obscurely, but it seems that the harlot had deserted Enkidu, for he laments his association with her. Gilgamesh then opened to him his design to go on an expedition to the cedar forest and fight with a fearful ogre named Kumbaba, who had been appointed by the gods as warden of the forest. Enkidu sought to dissuade his friend from this rash project, saying that he himself, when he lived with the beasts, used to penetrate into the skirts of the forest, where he had learned to dread the roaring breath and flames emitted by Kumbaba. To this Gilgamesh seems to have replied that he must go to the cedar forest to fetch the wood he needed, and when Enkidu still objected, he concluded with the reflection that death was inevitable to mortals, and that he would therefore meet it in a glorious enterprise which should win fame for him among his children forever. The craftsmen were then ordered to cast weapons for the pair, and this they did, making gigantic axes and gold-ornamented swords, so that each of the warriors was equipped with an armament weighing in all 10 talents. Attracted by these preparations, the people of Erech gathered at the gate, and Gilgamesh announced his project to the elders of the city, who in turn sought to dissuade him, but in vain. Gilgamesh commended his life to the sun god, and the 2 put on their armor. The last words of the elders were a warning to the king against rash presumption in his own strength. Setting out on their journey, the 2 warriors first visited the temple of Ninsun, the divine mother of Gilgamesh, who, at the earnest prayer of her son, besought the sun god to prosper him on his journey and in the fight against the ogre, and to bring him safely back to Erech. The latter part of this tablet is missing. The fourth tablet. So much of this tablet is missing that only a very general notion can be obtained of its contents. The 2 heroes had by now reached the gate of the forest wherein Kumbaba dwelt. Enkidu was amazed at the gigantic size and beauty of this gate, fashioned out of the timbers of the forest. When the text begins again, the 2 are found encouraging each other to their enterprise, and Gilgamesh burst through the gate. Soon afterwards Enkidu was overcome either by sickness or by dread of the combat, and lay inert for 12 days, apparently as the result of evil dreams which had visited him. In his weakness he strove again to turn back from their desperate adventure, but again Gilgamesh overcame his fear with encouragements. The fifth tablet. The two warriors were now in the forest, and this tablet begins with a description of its wonders. They saw a straight road running between its tall cedars, along which Kumbaba trod. They saw also the mountain of the cedars, the dwelling of the gods, and the pleasant shade and perfume which the trees spread around. After this they seemed to have fallen asleep, for Gilgamesh is next found relating to Enkidu a dream which he had had. The two were standing together on the top of a mountain, when the peak fell away, leaving them unharmed. Enkidu interprets this as a forecast that they were to overthrow the gigantic Kumbaba. At the 60th league they stayed to rest, and Gilgamesh besought the mountain to send him another dream. Falling asleep at once, he woke in terror at midnight and began to tell how he dreamed that the earth was darkened, amid loud roarings and flames of fire, which gradually died away. This seems to be a description of a volcanic eruption, and some have thought that Kumbaba was the personification of a volcano known to the ancient Sumerians. This dream too was interpreted by Enkidu, no doubt favorably, but nothing more remains of this tablet before the end, when Kumbaba has been fought and defeated, and his head cut off. A fragment of another version shows that he was defeated by the help of the sun god, who sent 8 evil winds against him on every side so that he could not move. Thus entrapped, he surrendered to Gilgamesh and offered submission in return for his life. This Gilgamesh was disposed to grant, but Enkidu warned him of the danger of letting the giant live. The sixth tablet. The scene now returns to Erech, whither the heroes returned after their glorious exploit. As Gilgamesh was washing himself and dressing himself in splendid attire, the goddess Ishtar saw his comeliness and desired him to be her lover, saying, "Go to, Gilgamesh, do thou be my bridegroom, give me freely the fruit of thy body. Be thou my husband, I will be thy wife, so will I make them yoke for thee a chariot of lapis lazuli and gold, its wheels of gold, and its horns of electrum. Every day shalt thou harness great mules thereto. Enter, then, our house with the perfume of cedar. When thou enterest our house threshold, and deists shall kiss thy feet, beneath thee shall kings, lords and princes do homage, bringing thee as tribute the yield of the mountains and plains. Thy she-goats shall bring forth abundantly, thy ewes bear twins, thine asses shall be, each, as great as a mule, thy horses in the chariot shall be famous for their swiftness, thy mules in the yoke shall not have a peer." In answer to this invitation, Gilgamesh made a long speech, in which he reviewed the calamities of those who had been unfortunate enough to attract the love of the goddess. To be her husband would be a burdensome privilege, and her love was deceptive, a ruin that gave no shelter, a door that let in the storm, a crazy building, a pitfall, defiling pitch, a leaky vessel, a crumbling stone, a worthless charm, an ill-fitting shoe. Who was ever thy lord that had advantage thereby? Come, I will unfold the tale of thy lovers. He refers to Tammuz, the lover of her youth, for whom year by year she causes wailing. Every creature that fell under her sway suffered mutilation or death. The bird's wings were broken, the lion destroyed, the horse driven to death with whip and spur. Her human lovers fared no better, for a shepherd, once her favorite, was turned by her into a jackal and torn by his own dogs, and Ishulanu, her father's gardener, was turned into a spider, because he refused her advances. So, too, said Gilgamesh, wouldest thou love me, and, then, make me like unto them? When Ishtar heard these words she was filled with rage, and went up to heaven, and complained to Anu her father and Antu her mother that Gilgamesh had blasphemed her, and revealed all her iniquitous deeds. Anu replied, in effect, that it was her own fault, but she insisted in the request that he should create a heavenly bull to destroy Gilgamesh. This he finally agreed to do, and the bull appeared before the citizens of Erech, and destroyed 1, 2, and 300 men who were sent out against him. At length Enkidu and Gilgamesh attacked the bull themselves, and after a hard fight, the details of which are lost, they slew him, and offered his heart together with a libation to the sun god. As soon as Ishtar heard of the bull's death, she rushed out on the battlements of the wall of Erech and cursed Gilgamesh for destroying her bull. When Enkidu heard what Ishtar said, he tore out the member of the bull and threw it before the goddess, saying, "Could I but get it at thee, I would serve thee like him, I would hang his entrails about thee." Then Ishtar gathered together all her temple women and harlots, and with them made lamentation over the member of the bull. And Gilgamesh called together the artisans of Erech, who came and marveled at the size of the bull's horns, for each of them was in bulk equal to 30 minas of lapis lazuli, their thickness 2 finger breadths, and together they contained 6 measures of oil. These Gilgamesh dedicated in the temple of his god Lugalbanda, to hold the god's unguent, and, having made his offering, he and Enkidu washed their hands in the Euphrates, took their way back to the city, and rode through the streets of Erech, the people thronging round to admire them. Gilgamesh put forth a question to the people, saying, "Who is splendid among men, who is glorious among heroes?" And the answer was, Gilgamesh is splendid among men, Enkidu is glorious among heroes. Gilgamesh made a great feast in his palace, and after it all lay down to sleep. Enkidu also slept and had a vision, so he rose up and related it to Gilgamesh. The 7th tablet. From fragments of a version of the Gilgamesh epic translated into the Hittite language, which have more recently been discovered, it is possible to gain some notion of the contents of this tablet, the earlier part of which is almost entirely missing from the Assyrian version. It appears that Enkidu beheld in his dream the gods Enlil, Ea, and the sun god taking counsel together. Enlil was greatly incensed at the exploits of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, and had resolved that Enkidu must die, though Gilgamesh might be spared. This was finally decreed, in spite of the attempted opposition of the sun god. In consequence, Enkidu soon afterwards fell sick, though nothing is preserved concerning the circumstances of this. But he seems to have attributed his misfortune for some reason to the harlot who had first brought him to Erech, for he is found heaping curses upon her. While he thus spoke, the sun god heard him, and, calling from heaven, rebuked him for ingratitude to the woman who had taught him all the ways of civilized life and had been the means of introducing him to Gilgamesh, by whom he had been raised to great place and would be given signal honors at his death. Admonished thus, Enkidu repented of his anger and now bestowed as many blessings on the harlot as he had before uttered curses. He then lay down again, with sickness heavy upon him, and dreamed a dream which he told to Gilgamesh. He saw a monster with lion's claws which attacked and overcame him, and led him away to the underworld, where he saw the miserable plight of the dead inhabitants, and ancient kings now acting as servants, and priests and sages who served before Ereshkigal, the queen of Hades. How the dream ended, and how Enkidu died, is unknown, for the text breaks off here. The 8th tablet. This tablet was entirely occupied by a description of the mourning of Gilgamesh over his dead companion. He lamented to himself, and lamented to the elders of the city, recalling how they had together overthrown Kumbaba, and slain the heavenly bull, and shared in many another exploit. Repeating the words of the sun god in the preceding tablet, he promised that he would cause all his subjects to join with himself in the lament for Enkidu. The funeral honors seem to have been described in the latter part of the tablet, which is missing. The 9th tablet. In bitter grief, Gilgamesh wandered about the country uttering lamentations for his beloved companion, Enkidu. As he went about, he thought to himself, "I myself shall die, and shall not I then be as Enkidu? Sorrow hath entered into my soul, because I fear death do I wander over the country." His fervent desire was to escape from death, and remembering that his ancestor Utanapishtim, the son of Ubaratutu, had become deified and immortal, Gilgamesh determined to set out for the place where he lived in order to obtain from him the secret of immortality. Where Utanapishtim lived was unknown to Gilgamesh, but he seems to have made up his mind that he would have to face danger in reaching the place, for he says, "I will set out and travel quickly. I shall reach the defiles in the mountains by night, and if I see lions, and am terrified at them, I shall lift up my head and appeal to the moon god, and to Ishtar, the lady of the gods, who is wont to hearken to my prayers." After Gilgamesh set out to go to the west, he was attacked either by men or animals, but he overcame them and went on until he arrived at Mount Marshu, where it would seem the sun was thought both to rise and to set. The approach to this mountain was guarded by scorpion men, whose aspect was so terrible that the mere sight of it was sufficient to kill the mortal who beheld them. Even the mountains collapsed under the glance of their eyes. When Gilgamesh saw the scorpion men, he was smitten with fear, and under the influence of his terror the color of his face changed, and he fell prostrate before them. Then a scorpion man cried out to his wife, saying, "The body of him that cometh to us is the flesh of the gods," and she replied, "2/3 of him is God, and the other third is man." The scorpion man then received Gilgamesh kindly, and warned him that the way which he was about to travel was full of danger and difficulty. Gilgamesh told him that he was in search of his ancestor, Utanapishtim, who had been deified and made immortal by the gods, and that it was his intention to go to him to learn the secret of immortality. The Scorpion Man in answer told him that it was impossible for him to continue his journey through that country, for no man had ever succeeded in passing through the dark region of that mountain, which required 12 double hours to traverse. Nothing dismayed, Gilgamesh set out on the road through the mountains, and the darkness increased in density every hour, but he struggled on, and at the end of the 12th hour he arrived at a region where there was bright daylight, and he entered a lovely garden, filled with trees loaded with luscious fruits, and he saw the tree of the gods. Here the sun god called to him that his quest must be in vain, but Gilgamesh replied that he would do anything to escape death. The 10th tablet. In the region to which Gilgamesh had come stood the palace or fortress of the goddess Sidui, who was called the hostess, or alewife, and to this he directed his steps with the view of obtaining help to continue his journey. The goddess wore a veil and sat upon a throne by the side of the sea, and when she saw him coming towards her palace, travel-stained and clad in the ragged skin of some animal, she thought that he might prove an undesirable visitor and so ordered the door of her palace to be closed against him. But Gilgamesh managed to obtain speech with her, and having asked her what ailed her, and why she had closed her door, he threatened to smash the bolt and break down the door. In answer Sidui said to him, "Why is thy vigor wasted? Thy face is bowed down, thine heart is sad, thy form is dejected, and there is lamentation in thy heart." And she went on to tell him that he had the appearance of one who had travelled far, that he was a painful sight to look upon, that his face was burnt, and finally seems to have suggested that he was a runaway trying to escape from the country. To this Gilgamesh replied, "Nay, my vigor is not wasted, my face not bowed down, my heart not sad, my form not dejected." And then he told the goddess that his ill looks and miserable appearance were due to the fact that death had carried off his dear friend Enkidu, the panther of the desert, who had traversed the mountains with him and had helped him to overcome Kumbaba in the cedar forest, and to slay the bull of heaven, Enkidu his dear friend who had fought with lions and killed them, and who had been with him in all his difficulties, and, he added, I wept over him for 6 days and nights, before I would let him be buried. Continuing his narrative, Gilgamesh said to Sidui, I was horribly afraid. I was afraid of death, and therefore I wander over the country. The fate of my friend lieth heavily upon me, therefore am I travelling on a long journey through the country. The fate of my friend lieth heavily upon me, therefore am I travelling on a long journey through the country. How is it possible for me to keep silence? How is it possible for me to cry out, my friend whom I loved hath become like the dust? Enkidu, my friend whom I loved hath become like the dust. Shall not I myself also be obliged to lay me down and never again rise up to all eternity? To this complaint the alewife replied that the quest of eternal life was vain, since death was decreed to mankind by the gods at the time of creation. She advised him, therefore, to enjoy all mortal pleasures while life lasted and to abandon his hopeless journey. But Gilgamesh still persisted, and asked how he might reach Utanapishtim, for thither he was determined to go, whether across the ocean or by land. Then the alewife answered and said to Gilgamesh, There never was a passage, O Gilgamesh, and no one, who from the earliest times came hither, hath crossed the sea. The hero Shamash, the sun god, hath indeed crossed the sea, but who besides him could do so? The passage is hard, and the way is difficult, and the waters of death which bar its front are deep. If, then, Gilgamesh, thou art able to cross the sea, when thou arrivest at the waters of death, what wilt thou do? Sidui then told Gilgamesh that Yoshinabi, the boatman of Utanapishtim, was in the place, and that he should see him, and added, if it be possible cross with him, and if it be impossible turn back. Gilgamesh left the goddess and succeeded in finding Yoshinabi, the boatman, who addressed to him words similar to those of Sidui quoted above. Gilgamesh answered him as he had answered Sidui, and then asked him for news about the road to Utanapishtim. In reply Yoshinabi told him to take his axe and to go down into the forest and cut a number of poles 60 cubits long. Gilgamesh did so, and when he returned with them he went up into the boat with Yoshinabi, and they made a voyage of 1 month and 15 days. On the 3rd day they reached the limit of the waters of death, which Yoshinabi told Gilgamesh not to touch with his hand. Meanwhile, Utanapishtim had seen the boat coming and, as something in its appearance seemed strange to him, he went down to the shore to see who the newcomers were. When he saw Gilgamesh he asked him the same questions that Sidui and Yoshinabi had asked him, and Gilgamesh answered as he had answered them, and then went on to tell him the reason for his coming. He said that he had determined to go to visit Utanapishtim, the remote, and had, therefore journeyed far, and that in the course of his travels he had passed over difficult mountains and crossed the sea. He had not succeeded in entering the house of Sidui, for she had caused him to be driven from her door on account of his dirty, ragged, and travel-stained apparel. He had eaten birds and beasts of many kinds, the lion, the panther, the jackal, the antelope, mountain goat, etc., and, apparently, had dressed himself in their skins. A break in the text makes it impossible to give the opening lines of Utanapishtim's reply, but he mentions the father and mother of Gilgamesh, and in the last 20 lines of the 10th tablet he warns Gilgamesh that on earth there is nothing permanent, that Mamitum, the arranger of destinies, has settled the question of the death and life of man with the Anunnaki, and that none may find out the day of his death or escape from death. The 11th tablet. The story of the deluge as told by Utanapishtim to Gilgamesh has already been given on pp. 31-40, and we therefore pass on to the remaining contents of this tablet. When Utanapishtim had finished the story of the deluge, he said to Gilgamesh, "Now, as touching thyself, who will gather the gods together for thee, so that thou mayest find the life which thou seekest? Come now, do not lay thyself down to sleep for 6 days and 7 nights." But in spite of this admonition, as soon as Gilgamesh had sat down, drowsiness overpowered him and he fell fast asleep. Utanapishtim, seeing that even the mighty hero Gilgamesh could not resist falling asleep, with some amusement drew the attention of his wife to the fact, but she felt sorry for the tired man, and suggested that he should take steps to help him to return to his home. In reply Utanapishtim told her to bake bread for him, and she did so, but she noted by a mark on the house wall each day that he slept. On the 7th day, when she took the loaf Utanapishtim touched Gilgamesh, and the hero woke up with a start, and admitted that he had been overcome with sleep, and made incapable of movement thereby. Still vexed with the thought of death and filled with anxiety to escape from it, Gilgamesh asked his host what he should do and where he should go to effect his object. By Utanapishtim's advice, he made an agreement with Yoshinabi the boatman, and prepared to recross the sea on his way home. But before he set out on his way Utanapishtim told him of the existence of a plant which grew at the bottom of the sea, and apparently led Gilgamesh to believe that the possession of it would confer upon him immortality. Thereupon Gilgamesh tied heavy stones to his feet, and let himself down into the sea through an opening in the floor of the boat. When he reached the bottom of the sea, he saw the plant and plucked it, and ascended into the boat with it. Showing it to Yoshinabi, he told him that it was a most marvelous plant, and that it would enable a man to obtain his heart's desire. Its name was Shibu Isahir Amalu, i.e., the old man becometh young, again, and Gilgamesh declared that he would eat of it in order to recover his lost youth, and that he would take it home to his fortified city of Erech. Misfortune, however, dogged his steps, and the plant never reached Erech, for whilst Gilgamesh and Yoshinabi were on their way back to Erech they passed a pool the water of which was very cold, and Gilgamesh dived into it and took a bath. Whilst there a serpent discovered the whereabouts of the plant through its smell and swallowed it. When Gilgamesh saw what had happened he cursed aloud, and sat down and wept, and the tears coursed down his cheeks as he lamented over the waste of his toil, and the vain expenditure of his heart's blood, and his failure to do any good for himself. Disheartened and weary he struggled on his way with his friend, and at length they arrived at the fortified city of Erech. 19 Then Gilgamesh told Yoshinabi to jump up on the wall and examine the bricks from the foundations to the battlements, and see if the plans which he had made concerning them had been carried out during his absence. The 12th tablet. The text of the 12th tablet is very defective, but it seems certain that Gilgamesh, having failed in his quest for eternal life, could now think of nothing better than to know the worst by calling up the ghost of Enkidu and inquiring of him as to the condition of the dead in the underworld. He therefore asked the priests what precautions should be taken in order to prevent a ghost from haunting one, and, being informed of these, he purposely did everything against which he had been warned, so that the ghosts might come about him. This, however, failed to bring Enkidu, so Gilgamesh prayed to the god Enlil that he should raise him up, but Enlil made no reply. Next Gilgamesh prayed to the moon god, but again his prayer was ignored. He then appealed to the god Ea, who, taking pity on him, ordered the warrior god Nergal to open a hole in the earth. Out of this the ghost of Enkidu rose like a wind, and the two friends embraced again. Gilgamesh at once began eagerly to question the ghost about the condition of the dead, but Enkidu was loath to answer, for he knew that what he must reveal would only cause his friend dejection. But the last lines of the tablet tell the lot of those who have died in various circumstances, Though some who have been duly buried are in better case, the fate of others who have none to pay them honor is miserable, for they are reduced to feeding upon dregs and scraps of food thrown into the street.